Hey everyone, Louis V from Vinyl Latte, and today we're going to be getting our hands dirty. We're going to try to figure out how to get into that sweet spot, that nirvana, the exact position where you want to be relative to your speakers to make sure that you're getting the full sound stage and that your system just sounds amazing. So if that's something you like, you're at the right video, and let's go ahead and get started. All right guys, let me try to explain a little bit more what we're trying to do here today. I am working on kind of readjusting the room to make sure that everything is aligned properly. And I'm going to probably do a series of videos on this. One about dealing with rack, decoupling the rack, decoupling of the devices on the rack. But what I want to focus on today is a sort of speaker placement and making sure that it hits your sweet spot. Now, my room is a challenge. It's a 12 by 12 room. Some of that floor space is taken up by, you can see here, walls of records. So this cuts into my available space. I also have my desk and studio where I record all of the videos. On that side, I have more records behind me. I have a keyboard in the other corner. So my floor space where I can actually position equipment is a lot less than 12 by 12. On top of that, I have equipment in this room that's really meant for a much larger space. Now, a lot of that is because when I purchased the equipment, I purchased it in a mindset that I would not be in this space forever. I'm looking to get into a much larger space with my audio equipment, so I didn't want to make big investments and then regret those decisions later when I'm trying to power a larger room. So I feel like I'm like most people. You have equipment in your room. You probably don't have a dedicated room, designed for, custom built for listening to audio. You're probably taking over a bedroom or an office, or maybe you're in your living room. It's just things are not perfect. But how do you try to get the maximum of what out of the space that you have? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. What I want to talk about is how do I measure the speakers in the room to make sure that I am putting my listening position exactly where it needs to be. And there's a couple things that we need to look at. So why don't we go ahead and switch to a different view where I can kind of draw this out for you, what we're trying to accomplish, and then I'll walk you through how I go ahead and accomplish it. Okay, I recommend that if you're going to go ahead and try to get your room organized, that you create a little bit of a drawing to try to just keep track of what we're trying to do. So in this drawing, I'm going to just draw a straight line. That's going to be my wall. And then I'm going to try to draw out the rack, right, which is really just a rectangle. Now, I'm not worried about this being size appropriate or to scale or to have it 100% accurate. This is more just for me to keep track on what I'm doing and what I need to work on. But it's also going to give you a great example of what we're trying to accomplish. So if the lines don't line up perfectly on drawing this, don't worry. Even I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. So this is going to be the rack, right? And then back here is the wall. And the only other thing that we're missing are the speakers. Now, with my speakers, which are the KEF Reference 3 Meta speakers, my speakers do not have to be towed, okay? But I am going to tow them slightly just because where I sit is right at that point of 6 feet away from the speakers in a small room that honestly towing the speakers slightly, which is still allowable within inside of the recommendations of KEF. They said you can tow them slightly, I think up to 5 degrees. I do find it to be beneficial in making sure that I'm getting the absolute best out of my system. Now you can see in my drawing here, this is probably not 100% dead center in a rack, but the goal is to get into that dead center mix. So again, we're not drawing this to scale. You don't have to make it perfect. Some people want to do this on a computer, whatever, that's fine. But since my speakers are towed, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw them as such. So we'll draw, actually, let me push this out because my speaker is a little bit further out from the rack and I think it's going to give you a better example. So we're going to draw the speakers in a way that makes them towed. And since they're towed towards me slightly, that means that this far side here is going to be sticking further out from the wall than the other side, right? Now this is exaggerated. They're not towed that much, but it's going to just help you again put that visual, and it's going to help me put that visual of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it here in a moment. So again, things aren't to scale here. That's not the point. these speakers probably look a lot more towed than they really are. But this is the general, you know, kind of way that my room is made up, right? So this is the listening spot, and then you have the what would be the left speaker, and then we have the right speaker. Now, what we want to accomplish is a couple things. We want to establish a baseline. We want to establish that baseline that we can measure our speakers from to make sure that we're dead center in where our listening position is. So this is assumed center. Now, some folks will use markings on their wall. In fact, I actually have a window behind here that's blocked by an acoustic curtain. The problem is because the way my room is laid out, even though that window might be dead center, is not dead center to where, in relevance to where my rack is or where my listening spot is, right? So I can't use that as a guideline. I can't go center frame of the middle window and say, okay, that's going to be the dead center and move everything around it. Instead, I had to position my rack where it was kind of equal distance, where I had access to my piano, but also could access the record. So this is actually the rack is slightly moved over, and it makes it off-centered from the window. So what I want to do is make sure that how I configure this room and measure it is centered to the rack. I'm going to use the center of the rack as my guide. So just assume that this is center of the rack. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that our listening spot is centered to the rack? The first thing we're going to do is measure the distance from the bottom of the rack to the wall on the left side, and then we're going to do it again on the right side, or the right side, left side. It doesn't really matter. But we're going to measure these two distances first, and then with those distances measured, we'll at least know that the rack is not pushed away from the wall and they're both even distances from the wall, right? That's going to make sure that our rack is not tilted. And once we have our rack against the wall properly, then we have a good baseline to start measuring the distance of the speakers, etc. So let's go ahead and flip this camera around and do that first, and then we'll come back to this drawing for additional explanation. Okay, for the measurement, what we're going to be using for getting the right measure is you can use a tape measure. If you have a tape measure, you can use it. I find one of these. This is a digital measurer. It's a laser measurer. A lot more easy to use. I feel like it's a lot more accurate, and it takes away the hassle, especially if you're doing this yourself. I think this is a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun just measuring things in my house. It also allows me to measure how far away the speakers are from the listening position by myself. I don't need another person to hold a ruler and measure the speakers. All I do is just pop this bad boy on my head, measure left, measure right, and I know how far away those speakers are. One of the cool things about this particular gauge that you can get on Amazon, and I could put the link in the description if you like, is that as you measure, see if we can focus on that. Sorry, I lost focus there. It's pretty accurate as well. You can see that it measures up to 3 places after your decimal. So you're going to get really fine readings on where you're being placed. And there's a couple things we need to be considering here with these speakers. These KEF speakers are very powerful speakers. They're meant to go in a much larger room than what I have now. They sound fantastic in this room, by the way. So I can't wait to get them into a larger space where they can really open up and I can really spread them out. They sound great here, but there's a couple things I need to be thinking about. I need to be thinking about how far away the speaker needs to be from the wall, the minimum range recommended by the manufacturer, and the distance of the speaker to my listening position, which is a little bit off camera, but I'm pointing to where that is. I need to make sure that also falls in line. So there's a couple things that we need to do, and I think having one of these laser measures are really gonna come in handy. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get down to the rack so I can show you what we're measuring. Okay guys, you're kind of seeing behind the scenes here, but I wanna share with you how I'm gonna go ahead and measure the distance of the rack to the wall. So the first thing we're gonna do is, just for some simplicity, I'm gonna go ahead and clear out the measurements we did earlier. And then what I'm going to do is actually place the measurer squared up with the rack so that the front of the measurer and the kind of back end of the rack are squared. And then because I have this post here, this support that I can actually press the measurer against that. So by squaring up against a post in the front, I'm going to be able to take a measure. So the one thing we want to make sure we don't do when we take a measurement is hit any of these cables, and we also want to make sure that we're not hitting the floorboard here either. That can throw us off. I want to hit the wall directly. The cool thing is that this shoots a laser, but I can see if a cable's in its way and it's being blocked. You see that? By just lifting this cable, the light gets a lot brighter. So that means it's hitting the cable, and all I'm really getting is a reflection, which can throw off my measurement. So what we want to go ahead and do is lift up this cable, press the button, and get a reading that we can go ahead and use as a baseline. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay guys, so I did get 3 exact readings, which I think is important to do when you're using a device that's as sensitive as this particular one. Because even by just pressing the button, you can slightly move it, which can then throw off your readings. So getting 3 readings right in a row, I know that the unit's stable. I know that it's not going to move. I know that my recording, my measurements are accurate. The other thing to pay attention to too is in this particular one, it kind of gives you this little degree thing on how it's leveled. I always try to make sure that that is about close to 0 as possible. I understand sometimes getting exactly 0, especially when you're putting this on a shelf or something and we haven't leveled the shelf out yet or anything like that, can be really hard, especially when you're like 0.1 off. You could drive yourself crazy to get that 0.1 fixed and dialed in. I think that some audiophiles go to that length of making sure that everything is exactly crisp, but we also have things to do in our life. So getting nearly there, around what I would call 98 or 99% accurate, to me is good enough. There's going to be other problems in this room that are going to be much more worth my time investing into and fixing than just a very small fraction of a degree off level. So we always try to strive for perfection, but we don't get frustrated if we can't get there. Near perfect, near accurate, near 0 on anything we level is to me good enough. If it's slightly off and it's becoming a really big challenge to address it, I just move on with my life because I want to get to listening to music and not spending my whole day with the equipment. Again, this video is for the everyday person, so that's the rule that we're going to follow. Now that we go ahead and measure the left side of this rack, we're going to go measure the right side of the rack, and what we want is that 1.066 reading 3 times on the measurer to make sure that our rack is perfectly aligned to the wall. And if it's not, we want to adjust it so that it is. So why don't I go ahead and do that reading, and I'll get back to you as soon as I'm done. All right, guys, we just measured the right side, and I got 3 readings exactly where it needs to be. Let me see if I can get that in focus for you. You can see that I started off a little bit too far from the wall, just slightly moved the rack over and got the readings that we were looking for, 3 consistent 1. So now we know that the rack is 1.066 feet from the wall. So what we're going to do with that information is we're going to go add it to our sheet. So I'm going to see you back over at the desk. Okay, we're back at the desk. So what we can tell now is that our rack is 1.066 feet from the wall, and this side is 1.066 feet from the wall. So that means this rack now is absolutely centered against my back wall. So this now gives us a point of reference to work from to start doing some other measurements. The first thing I want to do is to measure how far away my speakers are from each other. And the way I'm going to do that is by measuring this point to this point of the speaker. So measuring from this point of the rack to this point of the speaker, which I can see from a line of sight. Now, if your rack is not a good place for you to measure the reference between the two, try to find something that's consistent, that you can align to the edge of the rack to do it. Sometimes by putting your measure on top of your rack in a certain position that you can replicate on the opposite side is a good way to do it. I'm going to show you how I do mine here in a moment. But what I want to make sure is that this and this are accurate from being the same distance away. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll come back to you here in a moment. Okay, guys, there is a bunch of ways that you can do this. I'm going to kind of show you probably the most, easiest way to replicate at home, thinking about using things that you have at home to be able to do this without needing to spend money or to make it overcomplicated. Hopefully by me showing you how simple this can be, it'll get your brain going of like, hey, this doesn't need to be super difficult. I could do this at home myself. So all I've done here is the first thing I've done is I took some boxes here, my Wally Tools Cartridge Analyst hardware box and my cartridge box, stacked them up top of each other, and take the leveler and put that on top. Why did I do that? Because now I can go right against this rack. So now I know that it's even, it's not tilted, I'm getting a straight on reading. Now that we have this aligned to the rack, which now we know is also aligned to the wall, what we need to make sure is that we're measuring the end of this measure to the speaker in a way that is repeatable on the other side, that we're not, you know, too far out from the rack or we're too far in from the rack. So use what you have. I mean, you can line this up with your finger, although your finger's a little bit squishy and it might not be 100% accurate. Or you could take something like this, which is, you know, a record stabilizer. This is the Stack Audio Serene record stabilizer. And all I do is just put this against a rack, push this unit up, and now I'm squared, right? I'm squared against this side of the rack, and I'm squared against the edge of this rack. And when I turn this unit on, you'll see that I get a light here at the edge of the speaker. Once you have everything lined up and you're squared up against a rack, you want to go ahead and take those 3 measurements. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay guys, I got my 3 measurements and they are here. Let me just click on the screen here so you can see. But what we are at is 0.935. So I'm gonna go ahead and write that down on my sheet real quick, and then we're gonna go measure the other side. Okay guys, we got our measurements here. This is on the right side, 0.935. You can see it was a little bit off at the start. I just moved the speaker in slightly, so then I got the right reading, and now we can add that to our worksheet. Okay guys, we're back, and what we've done is we added those measurements to our worksheet, which means that now our left speaker and our right speaker are equal distance from the rack. That means that if we center our listening position to the center of the rack, these speakers are now going to be centered to us, creating that perfect triangle that we want to have. Okay, so now what we need to do to make sure that our speakers are actually even with each other, that if we measure the fronts of these speakers, that one speaker isn't further out or further behind, is to make sure that they are aligned from the wall. So we're going to be measuring is each point of these speakers, we're going to measure against the wall, and we're going to record those and make sure that the right speaker and the left speaker have the same measurements of those points against the wall. So we're going to grab our level, we're going to head back to the speakers, and we're going to do these measurements, and we'll come back to the worksheet. So you can see here that dot goes strictly on my wall. It's not obstructed by anything, meaning that it's not hitting the window, it's not off-centered, it's not hitting the curtain. I moved the curtain out of the way, but you can see that dot right here on my wall. Now I'm going to go ahead and square this unit up on this side of the speaker, the inner side of the rack, and take a measurement and get that 3 times. Once I'm done that, I'm going to go ahead and measure this side the same way. So just move this over, get it squared up using a box or the Serene stabilizer, whatever you have available to kind of square that up, and then I'll get a measurement here, and you can see that even here it's not obstructive, right? So if this was hitting the painting or something that was protruding from the wall, you're not going to have an accurate reading. So if that's the case, what you're going to want to do is put something back here to block it, or move the painting, or whatever you need to do. Just make sure you're getting an accurate reading. Okay guys, let me show you where we're at here. I've done the measurement on both sides of the speakers. So on the inner side, I got a replicated reading of 2.792 on both sides. So these were 100% accurate on both sides. I had a small deviation on the outer side. I'm at 2.864 on the right side, 2.861 on the left side. Now I spent some time to try to narrow this in, but because my speakers have spikes on the floor and I'm dealing with carpet, etc., this is about as close as I can get it without driving myself crazy and without spending a ridiculous amount of time trying to tweak it. For those with highly sensitive or looking for perfection, the goal would be to be able to have this exactly where it needs to be, meaning that you would make sure these numbers are 100% accurate. Now, being that, like I said, I have enough other challenges within inside of this room alone, this little change is not going to be as noticeable on this one side of the speaker than fixing some other things that we're going to fix later in this room. Maybe one day when I have a lot of extra time, I will work on trying to dial in these to get exact accuracy on this side. But I wanted to share with you when things aren't accurate, because I think it's important to show that, that, hey, we're human, we're gonna try to get this as best as we can get it. So, where are we at? We can now state that our speakers are centered and aligned with our listening position. So if we're doing the triangle, we are hitting the sweet spot on our listening, and our triangle is a real triangle, that we have all of the things in order. Now what we need to make sure is that we are far enough away from the center of this rack as the speaker manufacturer recommends, and then that we are actually positioning our seat center to that rack. So how do we do that? Well, we measure the rack from side to side, mark dead center, and then put our chair and then shoot from the center of that chair to the rack to make sure that we're hitting that mark. So that's what we want to go ahead and do, and I'll show you that process here in a moment. Okay, so we went ahead and measured the rack. It's a 4-foot rack, and I put tape right where the 2-foot mark is. And my goal would be to make sure that when I put my laser from my listening spot, that it hits that tape. And you can see right now where my chair is positioned that I'm actually off. I'm off by at least probably close to 2 inches away from that spot. Now that's probably not a big deal for most, but it's definitely going to throw off my sound stage and my imaging. So what I want to do is move that chair over. So the goal is the center of the chair hits dead center on that tape. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I measured a rack in exactly 4 feet, and I moved the chair over, and now we have a reading where we're hitting the red dot on the tape. So now we know the center of our chair, which is here, is even up with the dot. So this is a good thing. So now what we can go ahead and do is just make sure that our chair is the appropriate distance from the rack, making sure that let me zoom this down here so you can see what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is just measure the feet of the chair on that side and on the opposite side to make sure that I am the same distance from the rack. So we know that this is center. And what we're going to do is just take the chair, and if it's a little bit out or a little bit over, we're just going to kind of twist it a little bit to make sure that it is in the appropriate spot. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so let's go over our homework now. So we were able to now measure the distance from our chair from the corner of the chair on the right side and the corner of the chair on the left side to get the distance. And it took a little back and forth, but we finally got a measurement of 4 feet, 0.364, and that was on both sides. And then to verify that the measurement was accurate, I then measured from here on each point to the back of the wall, which was also equal. And both of those measurements measured 5.030. So that's the space that I have behind me from this point, from the front of the chair. Sorry, it's thundering and lightning here, guys, which is a perfect time to do all this because I have the equipment off. And it gives me something to do on a rainy day. But that's where we are in a measurement standpoint. So that means where we are now, and this is a little bit off scale, so imagine this triangle is a little bit wider, but that means that if we're in our center of our listening chair, which probably really should have been drawn back here, we would actually have that perfect intersect on where our speakers are playing from and to what we're hearing. So the one thing I like to do before we go on to the next step is just check the measurements of the chair, looking at that center again, just to make sure that I didn't knock off the center axis. So when I measure from the center of the chair, I still should be able to hit that tape. And then once we do that, we're ready to move on to the next and sort of final step on calibrating the speakers to the listening position. And let's go ahead and get the camera turned around here to talk about what we're going to do next. Okay, now that we have everything measured out, we want to make sure that the speakers are level. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can get a traditional leveler, a bubble leveler, which is great, but they're not necessarily the most accurate. Instead, I like either a mechanical level or get one of these highly sensitive digital levels. This thing is the most sensitive level I've ever used. It is very finicky. It can actually notice, just standing on a floorboard, you could see it actually react to that. So it addresses movement in a room. It's that sensitive. I always joke, and I actually think this is probably even true, is that just by putting a piece of paper underneath one side of this leveler, it tells you that it's off. So this is very, very sensitive. It's one of those that if you can get it dang near perfect, like a 0.01 on the accuracy, you're pretty much there on where you're going to be. It really is, unless you use one of these, you really don't know what I'm referring to. But any of these levels, digital levels, are no good unless they're calibrated. So the first thing always is calibrate them. Yes, it takes some extra time. It's going to take 2-3 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, depending on your level, to go through the calibration process. Do it. I do it every time I use one of these. I know that it's supposed to store that information. You don't have to use it, go through the calibration every single time. But if I'm going to go through the effort of leveling my speakers, which is going to be a pain in the butt to do, I want to make sure that I have the absolute accurate, calibration possible, so that effort pays off at the end. So calibrate your device. I'll go ahead and put a link of this in the description below if you're interested in this. I think it runs like 90 bucks on Amazon, or get yourself a level that you trust. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and level the speakers. So let me go ahead and get this camera turned around so we can take a look at what we're looking at. Okay, guys, you can see that the level says that this is my left speaker. It's a little bit off. So when we look at adjusting it, we're going to have to tilt the speaker a little bit over to go ahead and get that adjusted to get that bubble dead center. So what our goal is going to be is to get this small little circle as close to that center dot as possible, making sure that we basically have a 3-ring approach, almost like a bullseye approach to this level. So you can see this is very, very, very sensitive. We're talking about just me put my fingers on it, not even really lifting it. We're talking just ever so slightly lift is going to go ahead and change this. This takes time. When you're dealing with adjusting your speakers, it takes absolute time to make sure a couple things. You want to make sure that you're not moving the position of the speaker. So I recommend doing small incremental adjustments not to move your speaker. Otherwise, you just threw off all the other work that we just did. The second thing is that when you're dealing with something this finicky, small changes matter. Even just simply having the speaker settle on the carpet, because we just moved them, by pressing down, stepping on, excuse my ugly feet, but stepping on and pressing the speaker down into the carpet to help it settle, can shift. Look at that. Can shift. And you can see it moving because it's reacting to the balance of the carpet. So this is super, super sensitive. I recommend sometimes you might want to wait a day or two to do this after you move the speakers to make sure the speaker completely settles in the carpet, and then wait another day or two to readjust as necessary. It's a process. Yes, I know it's annoying, but it's something you can do at home, and all it requires is your time. So we're going to go ahead and see what we can do to get this speaker as balanced as possible, and I'll come back to you here shortly. Hopefully you can see that the level is about where it needs to be. It's reacting slightly because I'm standing in front of the speaker, and I just can't help but move a little bit while I'm holding the camera and talking to you. but I wanted to share with you that it's pretty much dead accurate. And that's how sensitive this thing is. You can see by just talking, let me zoom out here, you don't need to be that close. Hello, hello. You can see by just me standing up front of the speaker and my weight is reacting to the floor in this house, and it's causing that bubble just to shift a little bit. So a lot of times when I'm doing this, I actually have to stand back from the speaker and just look ahead of me, so I make sure that my weight is not influencing the floor. Now, if you have concrete floors, you have better floorboards on your house, that's less of a worry. But the way this house was built, new construction, that's just what we deal with these things these days with newer construction folks. It's an unfortunate event, but that's the reality of the situation. So once we have the left speaker balanced, we're gonna go ahead and move to the right, get them both balanced, and we're pretty much on our way. Okay guys, we got the right speaker balanced as well. Once I finish all of the balance in, I do the same type of validation, verification check that I shared with you earlier. So we go back to our worksheet, and what we want to make sure is that the measurements of the speaker compared to where our rack is and also to the wall is still accurate. Sometimes when you're just adjusting the speaker, depending on your situation, you can move it. You can jostle it out of position. Now, it's okay if those numbers change slightly, but what you want is consistency. So if you're if they change slightly on the left, and after you go to the right, and they're exactly you have a pair now from the left and the right, you're still good. Everything else is pretty much dialed in. So that's really it, guys. This is a very approachable way of getting that triangle dialed in without needing to read books, because I know there's massive Bible-style books on this topic, without needing to read those books that you can replicate at home. Now, audiophiles, those who classify themselves as such, etc., will want to go through a much more rigorous process. They're going to be more precise, they're going to use more precise tools, etc. But this is affordable. That digital leveler is the most expensive tool that's in the toolbox, and you can repurpose that, of course, use that for many other applications around a house, etc., than just balancing your audio equipment. So for me, it was a good investment, but you don't need to do that. I've been using this process for a long time, just using a basic leveler, but once I got the digital level, it ended up becoming my best friend because it's so precise, it's so finicky, and I actually like that. I like it because I use it to calibrate my turntable, to balance my turntable, and that's why I have it actually in the toolbox, was to get my turntable's arm board level, which we'll talk about in another video. Speaking of which, I think this does wrap up the first video. Once you have everything set up and you have it dialed in, not only do you have a nice graph so you know exactly your layout, but you also have the opportunity now to sit down, get yourself a cup of coffee, and enjoy the new sound. See how it sounds to you. See if the image seems more in focus. See if the sound stage seems to be more realistic. See if you can hear things a little bit better and clearer than you could before. Now that you're positioned sort of in that sweet spot, do you recognize the difference and a change? I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts, so share them in the comments below, and I'm going to see you on the next video where the next one in this series at least is going to be about dressing a rack. So stay tuned for that video, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you on that next video.